Hi, watch along as I make some floating shelves out of solid walnut for a client to install in their bathroom. This is a great one-day build in my small workshop. I'm starting with a piece of 8/4 walnut with some pretty heavy figuring at one end. My goal is to keep the color of the shelves as close as possible, as the shelves are going to be installed fairly close together. This wasn't completely possible as the board lightened up quite a bit towards one end. But as you'll see at the end, I think they turned out pretty good. I'm always mixing up how I break down rough lumber. It felt like it's been a while since I've used the jigsaw, so decided to use it today. Honestly, I think this is one of my favorite ways to break down rough wood. It feels much safer than the miter saw and is easier to manage than a circular saw. After I broke them down, these boards were pretty flat, but there was a bit of wobble in each of them. I used my planer sled, some hot glue, and wood shims to get the rock out. Then, a couple light passes through the planer gave me one flat side. This works fine for smaller pieces, but I still want to get a jointer one day. After, I removed the board from the sled and passed them through the planer with the newly flat side face down. Once I had both sides flat, I alternated as I was pushing them through the planer until I got to my final thickness of around 1 3/4 inch. Then I head over to the router table to run one edge through and square it up to the faces. Now that my boards are to thickness with one flat edge, the usual next step is to run them through the table saw to get 2 parallel edges, and to get the board to its finished width. I wasn't confident in how I was going to lay out and route the recess for the mounting hardware, so I decided to leave the boards extra wide for now. I think maybe I made a couple of mistakes here. I used a 1/2 inch spiral bit that I have on the router table. I dropped the router down as far as it would go, but there was still about 1 inch of bit sticking above the table. I think the logical thing to do here would have been to either lower the router in the actual lift or to get a shorter bit. I decided to see what would happen if I just went ahead. I'll say that it worked, but it didn't sound super great and it certainly jumped around a bit a few times. This would have definitely ruined the piece if this recess was visible, but since it's in the back facing the wall, no one will see it. Next time, I'll take the 2 minutes and adjust the router's position in the lift. Now over to the miter saw and the table saw to get the shelves to their final size. This was straightforward and uneventful at the miter saw, and the first cut on the table saw also went well. The second rip on the table saw was a first for me. It started out fine, but got increasingly more difficult to push the wood through. I stopped and restarted the cut, thinking maybe some tension in the wood release and was twisting a bit, and hoping that recutting it would clean it all up. Same problem, resulting in a bunch of smoke and finally the breaker tripping. As you can see, it was quite the chore to get the wood off the blade. I ended up flipping it over and completing the cut from the back, which went pretty well. Any ideas what happened here? Just let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Then, unsurprisingly, I ended up with a bunch of burning on the side, so I set the fence to about a 1/16 of an inch narrower and just ripped both boards through to get them the same width. With that drama behind me, I used a 1/2 inch Forstner bit to drill the holes for the hardware. In hindsight, I drilled them a little bit further than was needed. I had measured from the bottom of the recess I routed into the shelf, but really the edge of the board is where the shelf bracket will sit against the wall once it's installed. A 1/2 inch bit was a little bit too big for the hardware I used, but that's the closest size bit I have. I had to use this funky bit extender thing to get the hole deep enough. It seemed to work, but it really was kind of suboptimal. I'm not sure if they make longer Forstner bits than what I have, but I definitely could have used one in this case. I set up a simple stop block with a scrap of wood to ensure that the holes were drilled at the same distance from each edge. I wanted a 22.5-degree bevel that came almost all the way up to the top of the shelf, leaving a 3/8 inch straight edge at the top. This was a straightforward rip at the table saw, and I used my old crosscut sled to do the crosscuts. I spent some time going back and forth, sneaking up on the correct size of the bevel so that everything lined up perfectly in the corners. With that all done, I sanded at 80, 120, and 150 grit. I've heard with Rubio Monocoat you are not supposed to go higher than 150, but some people go to 180. I don't know. I've always just stuck with 150 because that's what the can says. My wife has always given me a hard time about my posture. Let me know below in the comments if you think I need to slouch less here. Honestly, I think I'm doing a pretty good job. I then smoothed over all the edges with 150 grit sandpaper by hand just to give it a nice round, slight round profile to keep it from being too sharp. I finished these shelves off with Rubio Monocoat Pure. I did one coat, but I'm contemplating adding a second coat given that these will be installed in a humid bathroom. Thoughts on that? I've never used more than one coat of Rubio, but I've heard people using two without issue. I let the Rubio sit and soak into the boards for about 15 minutes and then give it a quick wipe off. Thanks for joining me on this build. These shelves were fun to build and I think they look great. Nothing beats solid walnut, and the figuring and grain pattern on these two is stunning. If you've made it all the way to the end, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. It really helps my channel grow.